Before this video starts, I forgot to mention this when I was actually recording the video. This will have heavy spoilers for House of the Dragon. So if you're someone that's only watched season 1, you don't know what happens in Fire and Blood, I would stay very clear of this video, or I would just be careful because there will be spoilers all the way up until the end of the Dance of the Dragons or the end of House of the Dragon in this video. So again, very important if you do not want to be spoiled.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be doing another character analysis. This is going to be very similar to the way we did Aegon III. I did that a couple weeks back, but we're going to be taking a look at Aemond's life, who he was as a person, and who he develops as. How do we get this morally complex character? And this video is going to be purely based off of Fire and Blood. I don't want to incorporate House of the Dragon because it's a very different character in my opinion with how they're going with the character and how I would say he is represented in Fire and Blood. Just based off of there's certain characters that are not in House of the Dragon that are in Fire and Blood that are very impactful to Aemond's arc. And I think there are other things that motivate Aemond, and the way he goes about doing things early in his life will impact things he does later on. So to me, I think you have to really separate the two characters. If you guys want me to do an analysis on him as a character in the show, I could also do that. I don't think I will for at least a little while. Maybe that'll be a video I do in the build up to season 2. But if you guys also have another character you'd like me to do, let me know down in the comments. I think the next one's going to be Maegor the Cruel. I did a poll. I think he was second as of right now, as of me recording this. But yeah, I hope you guys all enjoy this video. And also, before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps share and encourage people that might like this content as well. And let's get into it. So Aemond Targaryen is born in 110 AC. He is the third child of Viserys and Alicent, his older brother being Aegon, and his older sister being Helaena. Also, he will have another younger brother named Daeron. He has not actually been introduced into the story as of yet in House of the Dragon, but he is in Fire and Blood. Now, the major thing that we see, just like in House of the Dragon, is that his birth, along with his brother's birth, very much puts the Queen's side, so Alicent's side, against Rhaenyra's side. Because a lot of people believe that Aegon should become the next ruler. And naturally, that's going to separate the two sides, as we see on House of the Dragon. He is going to be against the black side of it from his birth. He's done nothing, but he's going to already be put against them. That's just how it is. And later, as Aemond kind of develops and he starts getting older, basically, he is just growing up hating the Velaryon boys. That's what has been taught to him. It's been passed down from Alicent to her children. Aegon kind of goes a little further in this, as we'll see later on, when Aegon is the one that, is telling Aemond that they are strong boys, which we'll find out, we'll talk about a little bit later. But the real thing here that's different from the TV show is that Aegon and Aemond, from a very early age, feel as though their birthright was being stolen. It's kind of made that kind of apparent. I think Aemond plays into that even more. I think Aegon kind of has a second thoughts when he goes to taking the throne, because he has to be much more persuaded and pushed into the role in the book than in the show. In the book, there's this whole idea where Aegon is basically being told, if you don't do this, you and your brother, your sister, everyone is going to die. We are going to die if you do not do this, and Rhaenyra becomes the queen. That's what's basically told to him, and he really has to be convinced into becoming king. But Aemond, I don't think, is needing to be coerced. I think he believes this from a young age. And as we also see on House of the Dragon, these groups are trained together. So think about their very little interactions that they do have, and the times they're training against each other. This only works to enhance the tensions, right? It's, you're constantly thinking about these young, impressionable kids. What are they constantly hearing from their parents? And this goes for Rhaenyra's side as well, that they are the bad guys, that you should hate them and all these things, and they're going to try and steal your birthright, this or that. And you kind of feel for Aegon and Aemond in this situation, and even, the Velaryon children. This is a problem that they've inherited, right? And because they're such an impressionable age, even the Velaryons even more, because they're a lot younger, it really leads to this conflict between the children. So let's skip about 10 years into Aemond's life, where we have his next most significant event. So 120 AC, Laenor Velaryon dies. And, everybody, very similar to House the Dragon, all of the Greens, all of the royal family are going to Driftmark to attend Laenor's funeral. Now, what is interesting at this point is that Aemond still does not have a dragon. This is very unusual. All the Velaryon kids have a dragon at this point. Helena has a dragon. Aegon has a dragon. It's very unusual that Aemond does not have a dragon. So, when they're going to Driftmark and all of this, Viserys brings up to Aemond that, hey, maybe, after the funeral, we can go to Dragonstone and you can claim a hatchling or an egg if you are bold enough. Now, this is something we really don't see of, because you guys have to remember, from a book point of view, we don't see into Viserys much as a person. He's saying this in a way that's almost mocking to Aemond, and to me, I think you can take it as two ways, where Viserys, again, is talking to a 10-year-old at this point. Aemond is only 10 by 120 AC. And I think Viserys didn't mean it to probably mean like, oh yeah, you're a coward or this or that. I think he means it as, if you're talking to a child, you're like, oh, are you bold enough to do it? Challenging them to, get a hatchling or an egg. Because that is, a pretty stressful thing at this young of an age. But we see already at Aemond's life is he is someone that I think he feels like everyone is against him and doubts him and kind of has a chip on his shoulder. And Aemond is really infuriated by this. And he basically wants to prove his father kind of a fool. And he sought to claim Vhagar, who was on Driftmark at this point. Vhagar did not have a rider because of Laena's death earlier. So that was Aemond's idea here, is he's going to try and claim the biggest dragon. Now again, Aemond is only 10 years old, trying to claim probably the second greatest dragon in Targaryen history. A lot of people could argue the first as well. That is a really big thing. And something that I think we know here is that Aemond's parents, Alicent, Viserys, would never have allowed him to do that. But he tries to sneak out, and he goes to try and claim Vhagar. Now, what's very different here is that the one that actually catches Aemond doing this is actually Joffrey. Now, Joffrey Velaryon, we've seen very little of him in the show, is only 3. So Aemond basically slaps him, threatens him, and then basically pushes him away. So Aemond, he's not a nice guy, but again, you got to remember, Aemond has been training against these people, not really Joffrey, but the other Velaryons. He has been having these thoughts put in his head that these are your enemy. It's kind of something where it's like, Aemond's done all this work to sneak out. He's building up all this courage to get Vhagar, or claim Vhagar. And then this kid that you realize is your enemy, more or less, just shows up and tries to stop you. I think this is a very natural kid response to this situation. I'm not saying that it's right to push a 3-year-old down, but that's kind of, I would assume, Aemond's thought process. And in this time, after he pushes down Joffrey, Aemond tames Vhagar, and it's like circles either around the castle or he circles up in the sky twice. Not completely sure on that, but he does that and he comes down. Now, when he comes down, Joffrey actually has alerted his brothers. Now, the show went a bit different where it had the twins. I know, by the way, this is a comment in a prior video I had. It's not confirmed that they're twins on the show, but Fire and Blood, lore-wise, they're twins. So we're going to say they're twins. The twins do not actually show up in the books. In the books, it's just the 3 children. It's just Joffrey, Luke, and Jace. So the 3 of them now begin fighting Aemond. Now, these are with wooden swords. It's not anything too bad. And the fighting kind of comes to a cease. And they both kind of separate. And this is something Aemond does quite a lot. He is someone that just antagonizes people, or he can't help himself from just being an ass at times. And this is going to start one of the things that I think really motivates Aemond's character, as we'll see. But what ends up happening is Aemond calls the Velaryon children Strongs because he believes that they are bastards of Harwin Strong, that Rhaenyra has been sleeping with or had been sleeping with Harwin and had created these 3 children. There's a lot of basis for that, and it makes a lot of sense why he would think that. This prompts Jace to be pissed off, to then attack Aemond. Now, again, I want you guys to think about here. So Aemond is 10 years old. Jace is 4 years younger than Aemond. And Luke is even younger. So these are 3 much younger children than Aemond. And Aemond just kind of dispatches Jace, and he starts to win. And then he starts savagely beating Jace until Luke drew his dagger and slashed his right eye out. And this is how Aemond loses his eye. This is how he becomes Aemond One Eye. And what follows this is kind of our parent meeting. It's very similar to House of the Dragon, but more or less, Alicent's like, we should take an eye from Luke. Rhaenyra's like, nah, but we should severely interrogate Aemond about where he heard the strong name for her children. And Aemond, under kind of a lot of pressure, says that it was his brother Aegon. Again, showing the family dynamic and how the two families are already at odds this early in their lives. I mean, you're a 10-year-old and you're getting into fights that loses you an eye. It shows you how bad the tensions are between the two. And this event would mark Aemond, as Aemond would be very vengeful of this for many years to come. And this would also kind of start to begin his training. He would start to be trained by Criston Cole of the Kingsguard, and he becomes a very dangerous warrior. And again, training with Criston Cole, one of the best fighters at this time, will do that. And what I think is interesting here is that this is not going to be the first time that Aemond has violence or does something that is violent or inherently not great, and he gets rewarded of it. Yes, he loses his eye, but he gets to keep, and he has claimed the strongest dragon in the world at this point. It's a very reoccurring theme that Aemond starts to learn that violence is something that gains him power. And I want to talk about 3 specific instances, and this will be the first one that happens. And it's a very interesting tale, and it's something that I think is very interesting and really expands on Aemond's character of why he does violence. Because he sees it as a means to an end. And I think a lot of people have taken the idea that, oh, Aemond is more of a complex character on the show. I think it's nice that we get things with Aemond's character, because, I mean, that is basically his whole entire early life until the Dance of the Dragons. They do add to it in House of the Dragon, where they show that he's being bullied even by Aegon, and how he feels like Aegon's just a terrible guy to be king, that he should be king, and giving him more motives. There's also things that they took out that aren't there. And the whole idea that violence has gained things for Aemond, they've kind of strayed away with that. And if we're going to talk about, again, the beginning of the Dance of Dragons, that's going to be the second moment, right? So I think Aemond is still a very developed character. I think he's definitely one of the major villains or characters of the Dance of the Dragons, but I think he has a lot of humanistic characteristics that I hope you guys have seen from the first part of his life. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before getting into the Dance of the Dragons is just another bit of foreshadowing into who Aemond's character will be and who he is already. So Aemond, they get back to kind of King's Landing, and Viserys gives Aemond a feast for his good health. And after Viserys leaves, Aemond calls the Black children, so the Velaryon kids, Strongs at the feast. Again, kind of similar to the way it was in the show, but I'm assuming this is more of a public feast. It's not really just the family, right? So that is kind of the last idea here, and that Aemond very much continues being the antagonizer, right? He is the one that's more vocal about his issues with the Blacks, unlike Aegon. And that will lead us to 129 AC. So up to this point, we've seen just Aemond just training a lot and growing as a person and honing in his skills. So Viserys dies in 129 AC, and at this point, Aemond is now 19. So at this point, he is a full, adult at this point, really. He is someone that's very much come to his own. If we look at characters like Robb Stark has to take control of the Northern forces at like 15. So, again, he is definitely able to now command forces. He's definitely a very competent warrior, and he's a very skilled warrior. Now, as we know from the TV show, Aemond's brother Aegon is crowned. Now, I will say there was not this whole plot where Aemond and Kristen Cole have to go find Aegon. That's not in the books. In the books, Aegon is found one way or another pretty quickly, and then has to be convinced to become king, and then he becomes king. It's a very boom, boom, boom process. There's not really any other character development here for Aemond, so I just wanted to mention that because of the show counterpart and how they went with that. And the Greens fearing now that the Baratheons would support Rhaenyra because, again, Rhaenys, who has declared for Rhaenyra, and the Velaryons as a whole were declared for Rhaenyra. Rhaenys has some Baratheon blood, so a lot of people suspect, okay, and the Greens specifically suspect that the Baratheons will go for Rhaenyra. This prompts them to send Aemon to Boris Baratheon and try to get an alliance, and he is to offer his hand to one of the Baratheon daughters. And while Aemond is on this mission, and when he gets to Storm's End and he's speaking with Boris Baratheon, Luke eventually interrupts and arrives. Now, the whole idea here is that it's a bit different, actually, in the book, where it's a much more sketchy, where Boris Baratheon cannot read, and a maester comes up, has to read the letter for him, whispers a couple things in his ear, and Boris Baratheon gets very pissed off and angry. It's not like the show, where I think the show did a good way of doing it as well, but he gets actually pissed off and is like, no. So, this whole time that this is going on, Aemond is just provoking Luke, saying, he needs vengeance for that eye, and Luke owes him an eye. And more or less, this ends with Luke not getting the alliance of the Baratheons, and he leaves. They are separated, and he leaves. Aemond, now at this point, he's kind of just like, all right, whatever. Can't really do anything about it. And it seems like there's going to be nothing that comes out of this. Luke will go back to Rhaenyra, and Aemond will stay, I guess, for a little bit longer. Until a very important character comes into the shot. And this is something that was completely cut from the show, and something I really disliked that they did, is that Boris Baratheon's daughter, Maris, she starts to taunt Aemond. She specifically says if Luke had removed his balls as well as his eye. And as we've seen foreshadowed earlier on, Aemond is not the type of guy that you call a coward, or that you say, or make fun of him, really. He really hates that. It's the one thing that motivates, or it's the one thing you can manipulate Aemond on, and Maris does it perfectly. Aemond, with Boris's leave, leaves the hall and to go after Luke. Boris is basically like, just don't do anything in my hall. Whatever you do after you leave these doors, that's up to you. You're basically a prince. So Aemond leaves, and he catches up with Luke and Arax and kills them. Now, very big change that House of the Dragon did, where this wasn't intentional, right, in the show. And there also are way different motivations for why things happen. And we also get a rumor here. I'm not sure if I believe this rumor, but it wouldn't surprise me just based upon Aemond's character. But it is said by Mushroom that Aemond found Luke's body after the fact, and he took both of his eyes out and gave them to Maris. Very hardcore. I don't know if I believe that, but it is a really interesting idea. Now, this is what I want to talk about. So, there are two different reactions that come about when he returns home. Alicent and Otto are horrified of his actions because, again, he's a kinslayer in this regard at this point. And also, killing Rhaenyra's children was not a good idea. Any idea of peace or any idea of solving this war just flew out the window. And they are not happy with Aemond at all. But then there's another reaction. The one that's much more important, I think, to Aemond is that Aegon saw him as a hero and held a feast in his honor. Now, I think this is interesting because throughout this entire story of Aemond's life, have I ever mentioned that Aemond has had any recognition, that people have seen him as a hero? No, because he hasn't been that, right? All the attention has always been on Aegon, or Helena getting married to Aegon, or Helena giving birth to Aegon's children. None of that has been put on Aemond. So Aemond is a character that has very much been deprived of any attention or good in his life. And let's think about when this happens, directly after another act of violence. So what is this building on Aemond's character, and why do I keep bringing this up? Is because Aemond is going to start to understand and build this in his head that violence is the way to gain power, to gain respect, gain recognition. And that's a very reoccurring theme within Aemond's character. And I think that's something that they've sorely missed in the show that I think is a very awesome idea to play with Aemond's character, as we see how eventually violence is going to betray him and how he doesn't gain power on that last act of violence. It's something that I really love, and I think it's a very awesome mini story when you think about Aemond's character as a whole. I also want to talk about the effects of this. Because Aemond does these things, Blood and Cheese, the revenge killing of Aegon's son Jaehaerys, happens. This eventually drives Helaena mad, seeing her son killed directly in front of her, and she basically condemned one of them to die, and they killed the other. It's something that completely breaks his sister, as well as getting his brother's kid killed. It's this idea that violence has side effects. Where, think about it, every time, it's a double-edged sword, right? Where we talked about Aemond has gained power from violence or recognition, does violence and actively initiates it with the Velaryon children. He gains Vhagar, but he also loses an eye. He kills Luke, right? He gains gratitude, recognition. He's hailed as a hero by his brother. His sister is driven mad, and one of his family members also dies. It's one of those great themes that George R. R. Martin uses, that violence is not good, war is not good, and these are little things within that story. Now, this will take us into the actual war of the Dance of the Dragons, and the first combat we see with Aemond is the Battle of Rook's Rest. So an idea that's been going on here with the Dance of the Dragons is that, how do you use your dragons? And what ends up happening here is Aegon and Aemond and Criston Cole kind of set a trap at Rook's Rest to lure Rhaenyra out. So basically, they're going to attack her bannermen and see if she'll come to defend them. Because if she doesn't, she's letting one of her bannermen die, and what does that say for the rest of her bannermen, right? But if she does come, they have two dragons, Vhagar being the strongest, to kill her. Now, what they did not expect is that instead of Rhaenyra showing up, she's very much in grief. She doesn't want to send out her children to do any of the fighting because she just lost a child. Rhaenys shows up instead. And the trap is sprung. The two brothers, Aemond and Aegon, kill Rhaenys and Meleys. But again, violence rears its ugly head, where it's a double-edged sword once again. Now, I guess I said 3. You could actually say probably 4 instances, because Aemond here remains unhurt, right? But his brother and his brother's dragon are in terrible shape. So what ends up happening here is, now, on his third act of violence, his brother is close to death. His brother's dragon is close to death. But the other side of that sword, Aemond now takes power in the realm for about a year. He stows Aegon the Conqueror's crown upon his head, and he even utters that it looks better on me than it ever did Aegon. So we see how violence again brings rewards to Aemond, but it also hurts his family, a very common theme throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, Aemond, now being in full control of the forces of the Greens, him and Criston Cole decide to march and try to take Harrenhal. So they decide to do this, for one, because Daemon has been basically terrorizing the Riverlands, and this is their main point of meeting. It's a very strong position, as we see with the War of the Five Kings. Harrenhal changes hands quite a ton because it's a very vital position in the middle of Westeros that allows you to really maneuver really well. And Aemond and Criston Cole take all their forces, their dragon Vhagar, and look to take Harrenhal. Now, the problem with this is they leave King's Landing basically defenseless. Rhaenyra sweeps in from behind, takes King's Landing, and Aemond finds out about this, on their journey to Harrenhal, but at this point, it's too late. And when they get to Harrenhal, it falls pretty quickly. Daemon is nowhere to be found, nor Nettles, they're just nowhere to be found. So at this point, for a little while, Aemond will reside at Harrenhal. He takes a bedmate, Alice Rivers, an interesting character that we'll talk about on the legacy of Aemond, and even some interesting theories that we'll probably discuss in the future. They become close, as we'll say. And this leads us to Criston Cole and Aemond kind of figuring out what do they have to do next. And Criston Cole really advises Aemond that maybe he should meet up with his brother, Daeron. And Aemond is not doing that. Aemond is someone that really wants all the glory for himself. Again, we see violence for him gains him power. And that's kind of what his thought process is, in my opinion. And Criston Cole and Aemond decide to separate. Criston Cole takes their forces, and Aemond is really going to do guerrilla warfare. He is going to burn the settlements of black supporters. He is going to basically go from place to place, burning places down and not being caught as well. Now, when he starts doing this, Daemon and Nettles are just looking for him, because this is happening constantly, where they'll leave a settlement will get burned. They can't find Aemond, and it shows how much of a genius Aemond was at guerrilla warfare and how great he understood military combat. Like, yes, he had a major military blunder with leaving King's Landing undefended, but he was also very good in his own right, and this was really a chess game between Aemond and Daemon. And for this point of the war, Aemond was winning. And eventually, Daemon and Nettles get split up because Rhaenyra gets very paranoid with the dragon seeds. 2 of the other dragon seeds had betrayed her, so she becomes very untrusting of the dragon seeds, and she also believes that Nettles and Daemon had a relationship together. So realistically, what ends up having to happen is Daemon has to split from her, and Nettles has to leave, or she's going to be imprisoned and or killed. So Daemon, now by himself, decides to go to Harrenhal and challenge Aemond. He waits 13 days at Harrenhal until Aemond arrives with Vhagar. And now this can only be described as, I think, the greatest dragon battle in the entire history of A Song of Ice and Fire, with Caraxes and Vhagar, 2 of the greatest dragons in Targaryen history, and they go at it. And before we get into the outcome of that battle, I also wanted to make an interesting note here that Aemond arrives with a pregnant Alice Rivers. Very interesting, because if Alice Rivers is pregnant with Aemond's child, that opens up a very interesting plot line. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Aemond ends up dying. And so does Daemon, so does Caraxes, and so does Vhagar. This battle kills all 4 of them, but it is a different battle, where violence has always been Aemond's ally, and it's always gained him power. And on this final battle of violence, he's met his match with someone that has equally seen that. This is really 2 people that are a mirror of themselves. Daemon has someone that's always profited from violence as well. He's a character that has killed, schemed to kill. He's done a lot of questionable things, just like Aemond. And this time, Daemon wins. Daemon puts Dark Sister through Aemon's eye socket and kills him. Now, with that being said, Daemon also dies. So again, what can we get out of this? Violence is not the way. 2 characters that have been very prevalent to using violence as their main source of power and how they've gained influence die together, but their legacies that they leave are very far from minor. And eventually, Aemond's body as well is found, as well as Vhagar's. And Aemon's body is found with Dark's sister still lodged in his eye socket. A very weird thought to think about. But their bodies are eventually recovered and all of that. The last thing we hear of Aemon's line is during Aegon III's rule. So I did a video on Aegon III. If you guys want to watch that, I thought it was a pretty good video. But more or less, there is a rebellion, or not really a rebellion. It's more that Alice Rivers, so the bedmate of Aemond, is now in control of Harrenhal. And she says that she is the widow of Aemond and presents a child that she claims is Aemond's. Now, we don't have really any information as to what happens with this child. Because again, this is the very end of Fire and Blood. So we don't know what happens to this child. This child could still be alive later on in the story. Maybe we get more of this, and maybe Aemond's line continues. We're just not sure. And I think Aemond's legacy will be that he is a character that used violence. And it's been a common theme throughout this entire video. He's a character that took the wrong path. He was someone that used violence to gain respect, to gain glory, to gain reputation, recognition from his brother, to gain station. And it betrays him in the end, as it does almost all the characters that are inherently violent and use violence as their way of gaining power. It betrays you at all times. It's something that's very similar to, like, The Ring, where you can't use the ring. You can't master violence. Violence will eventually catch up to you, and eventually you will lose. And that's how I feel for both Daemon and Aemond. They're two very similar characters when you think about their objectives, how they go about doing things. And it's something that I'm going to be really interested to see how House of the Dragon explores. They've really gone away from the idea of violence being bad. And it's something that I think when you understand where I'm coming from in this video and talking about the main themes of both Aemond and Daemon's character, you start to understand why I think a lot of people hated episode 9 when it came to Rhaenys killing innocent people and almost glorifying death. Because that's something that is quite the opposite thematically of Fire and Blood, and goes against a lot of what it's trying to be told in that story. So that is really Aemond's story. That is kind of him from start to finish. He has a very short life. I think he lives 20 years old, because he lives about a year after Viserys dies. He does not live to see the end of the war. But Aemond, to me, is a very fascinating character. As you guys know, I'm a big Rhaenyra guy. So I've always viewed Aemond as a major villain, but he's a very intriguing character. He's someone that is really interesting to study and look at their psychology. But yeah, thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this one as much as I enjoyed recording it. I kind of put off recording this video for a while, just because I knew it was going to be a long video. It's going to be a lot of work just to make sure I fact check things. But I really enjoyed doing this video. I think it was one of my favorite videos I think I've recorded in a while. And I usually love recording all my videos, but just this one a lot more than usual. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about Aemond as a character, and let me know what you guys want me to do for the next character. Comment down below.